all to join in the responsive readings that will be led by the Surface Deployment and Distribution Command Chaplain, Jeff Hicks. At the end of the ceremony, we encourage you to submit the names of those military members and Department of Defense civilian employees you know who lost their lives on September the 11th, 2001, or in the subsequent global war on terrorism. You may include the names of your fallen comrades by writing them in the chat box. We will read each name aloud and then ring the bell to honor their sacrifice. As each name is read aloud, and at every striking of the bell, our fallen heroes' sacrifices are not forgotten. Indeed, our fallen heroes themselves are not forgotten. They live on in our memories and through their legacy of service to our nation. On September the 11th, 2001, 2,977 people from more than 90 countries perished at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Tragically, many hundreds more have died in the last 18 years, primarily first responders, from their exposure to hazardous material while digging through rubble during search and rescue operations at the World Trade Center. During America's longest war in Afghanistan, 2,349 military members have died, as have hundreds of Department of Defense civilian employees and contractors. During military operations in Iraq, 4,418 military members have given their last full measure of devotion to our country. All of this lost American treasure, the blood of patriots shed on faraway battlefields and at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, will be remembered and honored today. I'll begin our ceremony this morning by reading a poem. It's actually a verse, an additional verse, written by Irving Berlin. He famously wrote "God Bless America" while serving with the United States Army during World War I. In 1938, with the world on the brink of a second world war in Europe, Irving Berlin reinserted the following additional verse. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. Now I ask that you please join us in the singing of "God Bless America," which will be led by Miss Kathy Hahn.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Please be seated. For those of you who are here in person, at this time, we welcome the Senior Enlisted Leader, United States Transportation Command, Chief Master Sergeant Jay France, to reflect on the significant impact 9/11 had on his life and career. Chief.
All right. Well, first I want to start by saying thanks, Chaplain, for putting this together, to you and the team. This is great. For everybody who has the opportunity to dial in today, and for those present, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to stop for a minute and recognize what happened on 9/11 as well as how it has changed all of our lives. And that question, when you pose that to me, sir, there's a lot of different ways I could go with that. So I'll just go through a few of those major things because it definitely had a significant impact on my life, both personally and professionally. So on the morning of September 11th in 2001, I was an instructor assigned to the Air Force Expeditionary Center under Air Mobility Command up at then Fort Dix, New Jersey. And we had a class of about 350 students on the ground. It is a pre-deployment training center. And I was off to the side, though, as a trainer for Air Mobility's Command Security Forces Tactics Team for a competition called Defender Challenge. So I was actually out on an obstacle course when one of my teammates from the squadron, from our organization, came out to tell us that a plane had hit one of the towers. Initial thoughts were that it was probably a small commercial plane, some type of accident. Then we found out shortly after that about the second plane, so we took everybody off of the obstacle course, brought our team back to the unit, as well as brought all 300 plus students back to the squadron to figure out what was going on. I remember specifically watching the news because we turned on all of our TVs across and just watched this unfold in front of us. But it was time at that point as members of that organization to rally up and exercise some leadership because we had to figure out what we were going to do with those 350 students because immediately we started getting calls about getting those folks back to their home stations to prepare for whatever was next. September 11th was on a Tuesday. Well, as we started to push out all of those folks on trains and buses to get them back, those folks that were inside the United States because we still couldn't fly yet, the rest of us that were in that organization were part of a deployment team, and we're trying to figure out where the Air Force was going to send us to set up. That Saturday, I was the best man for my best friend, so we had a wedding up in New Hampshire that I drove to, and this is where the personal part comes into it. My wife was part of my friend's wife, her wedding party, and at that moment, at the wedding, looked across, knew that that was the woman that I wanted to marry. So that's a little bit of the personal spin, not so much because of the events, but a lot of emotion and things were going on in that. So, hey, let me make sure I seal the deal with this. And here we are, 19 years later, still together. We had a special pass to go to that wedding because we were still uncertain on what we were going to do. I got back on a Sunday, and immediately the Phoenix Raven, folks that do flyaway security for Air Mobility Command aircraft, immediately spun up, drove down to Charleston Air Force Base that Monday, which was the 18th, I believe, and we started flying missions around the globe. That's the first time I got to see TRANSCOM actually unleash and do that projection and sustainment of combat power at a large scale. Still not certain what the future was going to hold, but we were flying around the world, setting conditions, setting things up to allow the global mobility machine and the forces around to prepare to project. Came back after a few weeks of that, and then I had the fortunate opportunity to deploy to Bagram, Afghanistan with a tanker airlift control element in early December. And that is, again, where I got to see United States Transportation Command exercising its power. There were about 350 of us there at Bagram, and things were getting very interesting as a young NCO, a lot of opportunity for leadership. Then on January 4th, Sergeant First Class Nathan Chapman was killed. And being one of the small bases in Afghanistan, we were on the receiving end of him and an individual from another government agency who had been ambushed. And I had never seen anything like that up to that time in my life. And being one of the few people that had a vehicle on Bagram Air Base, had the opportunity to go up there, help the team, pull the two folks off of the helicopter, bring them back to get some treatment. Unfortunately, Sergeant First Class Chapman died. And at that very moment, that is where I gained an appreciation and understanding for service and sacrifice to our nation. And then in three following deployments to Afghanistan, 3 to Iraq, had plenty of other opportunities to understand service and sacrifice, but that was key moment in my life, both personally and professionally. Then from what I've noticed, I could take several other stories there, but what I noticed as a nation is that for the first time in my life anyway, I watched the United States get past our political differences, our religious differences, all of our cultural differences, and we all rallied together. And it was a good feeling despite the challenging times. And still to this day, that was the first time I had ever heard, coming back from a few deployments before that time, people coming up in the airports or around when they find out you're in the military and say, thank you for your service. That, fortunately, despite the challenges we're facing in our society today, that is one thing that still continues, and I firmly believe that was a significant turning point. And then on the personal and professional side, those opportunities that came from that as far as growing as a leader, growing as a husband, growing as a father, and all of those things after that, I see, despite the challenge and the terrible things that happened that day, I focus on the goodness that has come from that and really leverage that in what I do every single day. So, a lot of different places I could go with that, but Chaplain, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for putting this together and the team. And thank you for reaching out and allowing me this opportunity to share just a few things. And with that, I will get off the stage because I know there are other people that are looking forward to sharing some things. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief France. So now we welcome the Chief of Staff, Major General Deb Katulich, to share her thoughts on 9/11 and, among other things, how it has impacted her life as a citizen soldier.
Thanks, Chaplain. I'm going to take this in a little bit different direction as well, though. Admiral Newborn, thank you. General Lyons, I know you're attending virtually. Thanks for joining. There have been certain days in America's history which have defined our nation. For example, in the early 20th century, in Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, following that, the subsequent Great Depression that lasted a decade, our nation eventually bounced back. President Roosevelt's New Deal initiatives, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Projects Administration, Civil Works Administration, and some other things, set the conditions, but Americans demonstrated that resolve, resiliency, and unity that the Chief talked about to overcome that devastating financial crisis. United we stood. A number of years later, in the wake of December 7th, 1941, a date that will forever live in infamy, our country focused on defeating the Axis powers. Every facet of life on the home front was oriented towards the war efforts. From victory gardens to food rationing to bond drives, Americans saved, served, and sacrificed in unity. Once again, together we stood. Then, almost 6 decades after Pearl Harbor, the United States experienced on September 11th, 2001, another surprise attack on our shores. And in the immediate aftermath, as Chief discussed, Americans rallied around the flag, around first responders, and around the military in unity. United we stood. As we gather here and virtually, I do also want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Sedgwick, First Sergeant Velasquez for putting this together. I want to thank all the folks participating, and I want to thank all of you for joining us as we commemorate the 11 years since one of the darkest days in American history. Do you remember where you were when you heard about or even watched those attacks? I know I did. I do. It was really surreal for me watching the plume of smoke rise above the Pentagon. I was actually working about 16 miles south in an area off of Fort Belvoir, Virginia. I live very close to the Pentagon in Arlington, and my oldest daughter was 12 at the time, attending middle school about 2 miles away. The teachers told her and her classmates to get under the desks and duck and cover. A few hours later, one of the neighbors came and picked her up, brought her home. My youngest daughter was 6. She was in an elementary school, again, within miles of the building. A different neighbor had to pick her up and bring her home. Both have memories of crying and a building rattling and loud noises. For me, the traffic was coming out of the city so heavily it just took hours to get home that night. But within 24 hours, again, as a citizen soldier, I put on my uniform and I physically walked up Columbia Pike, if you're familiar with the area, a couple of miles through some barricades that had been set up. And I went to the point of impact to help with the relief efforts. And I was standing in the smoldering ashes at the point of impact. The sight was indescribable. I didn't want to look around. There were still first responders looking for any survivors. You could smell the smoke of the still burning jet fuel, making me sick to my stomach. It really was a horrible experience. However, what I saw was our nation unified, and I was encouraged by those displays of unity throughout America in the aftermath of the national trauma. Whether helping their neighbors or community, donating blood, many enlisting, joining the military, flying flags everywhere and anywhere, we came together, all races and backgrounds, perhaps as never before. A poignant moment exhibited by the members of Congress hours after the attacks when they came together on the steps of the Capitol building and in a bipartisan way saying, "God bless America." That's the way it should be. One of those congressional singer-vocalists was Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, and he stated that September 11th is one of our worst days, but it brought out the best in us. It unified us as a country and showed our charitable instincts and reminded us of what we stood for and stand for. Like 9/11, I would offer that America is in a crisis once again today due to the pandemic and due to a loud cry for racial equality. You know, in the 8 months since the pandemic, I think we've realized we've lost almost 200,000 of our fellow citizens. That's 22 times more than the casualties from 9/11 and the casualties from the operations over in the Middle East since the attacks. You know, both eliminating the threat of the pandemic, this deadly virus, and bringing equality to America is something that's going to require unity of effort once again. Thinking about our fellow Americans and being good to one another, whether that's wearing a mask or social distancing or treating everybody with dignity and respect. You and I, we together can make a difference. As the late author and speaker Helen Keller stated, alone we can do so little, and together we can do so much. Here, as part of Team U.S. Transportation Command, we achieve our #1 priority of warfighting readiness. Around the clock, around the globe, we execute our mission to project and sustain the joint force with a precision and perfection. But never forget that our ability to underwrite the lethality of the joint force relies on every one of us working together in unity. 19 years after 9/11, I would ask that we all take a look at the crises of today and once again work to allow it to bring out the best in all of us. United we stand, and together we deliver. Thanks again, Chaplain, for letting me speak. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, General Katulich. And we now welcome Ms. Renee Boyd, a retired United States Air Force non-commissioned officer and current member of the Military Surface Deployment and Distribution Command Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And she will share her 9/11 story.
Thank you, sir. General Lyons, Admiral Newborn, General Katulich, and Chief Francis, good morning. And good morning to all other members of Team Scott and to everyone tuning in on social media. Everyone remembers where they were and what they were doing during notable times in their life. General Katulich mentioned some of those times. Other times are when you were accepted into that college or university of your dream, or when you received that coveted promotion you worked hard, or when you found out you were not selected for a promotion you dearly wanted. You remember these events because they become an integral part of who you are. At a moment's notice, you can remember these occasions with striking detail. You remember these instances because they brought you joy and happiness, and unfortunately, they brought you sorrow and sadness. Sociologists refer to these times as significant emotional events, also known as Cs. Occurrences so arresting, you can call where you were and what you are doing at a moment's notice. We all have them. In fact, we all have a number of them. We just heard about Chief Francis' 9/11 We also heard about General Catulish's 9/11 I, too, have a 9/11 I was a junior non-commissioned officer stationed at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, as a professional military education instructor on that heart-wrenching day. My fellow instructors, the commandant, and I were in a staff meeting in one of the break rooms. The television was on, but the volume was turned down. A class had just graduated, and we were preparing for the next group of students to arrive. As we began discussing what actions needed to take place prior to the new students' arrival, one of my coworkers who was facing the television shouted, "Oh my gosh." My back was to the television, so I turned to look to see what had garnered his attention. Then someone else said, "Turn it up," referring to the volume on the television. My eyes were fixated on the screen when a plane hit what I later found out was the second tower. No one said a word as we moved closer to the television. As a news reporter explained what happened, I remember being consumed with an overwhelming feeling of shock and disbelief. Soon there was a split screen of New York City and Washington, D.C. Shortly thereafter, we heard about the Pentagon. It was a while later before I learned of Shanksville. My heart was heavy. So many lives lost. Why? Over the years, like so many others, I take time to remember this sorrowful day in our nation's country, in our country and in our lives. We all have been impacted by what happened. Some more than others. Still, we all feel the effects. So, how has the events of September 11, 2001 impacted my life? I'm more reflective, knowing that what is here now can be gone in a moment's notice. I let those in my life know that I care and appreciate them, and I lean on my faith. This does not mean that I don't have questions, because I do. This does not mean that I don't take a pause or pauses, because I do. However, and perhaps most importantly, it means, and in accordance with Proverbs 3 and 5, that I must trust in the Lord with all my heart and lean not unto my own understanding. I thank you all for the pleasure of your time this morning. Be well and be blessed.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd. Chaplain Hicks is making his way to the podium, and I'm going to tell you what happened. We had planned to put the responsive reading portion of this bulletin on the screen for you to watch. But when you combine the oldest chaplain in the Army with technology, bad things happen. So we have adapted and overcome. Last night, at least for our SDDC and TRANSCOM community, we emailed you the bulletin. So I have hopefully stalled enough to give you a chance to read that. And for those that are in physical attendance, we'll just follow along here. Chaplain.
Ladies and gentlemen, we remember today our soldiers, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, DoD civilians, and contractors who have given their full measure of devotion during the global war on terrorism.
Your sacrifice will never be forgotten. Your names will forever be on our lips.
We remember today those first responders, including firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and all other search and rescue personnel who lost their lives on September 11, 2001. And also those first responders who have perished in subsequent years due to exposure to the hazardous material at the Twin Towers and the Pentagon.
Your sacrifice will never be forgotten. Your names will be forever on our lips.
We remember today those brave passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. These American citizens sacrificed their lives to thwart another terrorist attack from striking our nation's capital.
Your sacrifice will never be forgotten. Your names will forever be on our lips.
We remember today our Gold Star families, for whom each and every day is Memorial Day.
We will forever keep you in our hearts and lift you up in prayer.
We remember today the spouses, parents, children, and all family members of all of our first responders who perished on September 11th, 2001.
We will forever keep you in our hearts and lift you up in prayer. Thank you, Chaplain Hicks. I now invite those assembled this morning to speak or write the names of their fallen comrades. And we speak their names so that their sacrifices are never forgotten, so that their contributions to our nation will always be remembered. So please take this time, I know many already have, to type in your names in the chat box. I am going to begin. I received a number of names by email yesterday, so we will ring the bell after each name is mentioned. Special Agent Tom Crowell. Special Agent Dave Weger. Special Agent Ryan Ballmer. Navy Lieutenant Marie Ray Sopper. Sergeant First Class William Woods. Major Ronald Culver. Sergeant First Class Kurt Como. Sergeant Major Bill Robles. Coast Guard Damage Controlman Third Class Nate Bruckenthal. Colonel Dave Botcher. Captain Donnie Belser. Marie Ryan Ott, New York City Police Department. Captain Mark Voss. Captain Victoria Pinkney. Tech Sergeant Herman Mackey III.
First Class Sean Cardelli. Staff Sergeant James P. Hunter. Sergeant Jeremy Murray. HM3 Christopher Thompson. Lieutenant General Timothy Maud.
At this time, as we are waiting to receive more names to come in virtually, we invite the members of the audience here with us in Seay Auditorium. If you would like to speak a name, you may come up to that podium and do so now. I now invite you all to join us in singing Eternal Father, Strong to Save, which is the Navy hymn, led again by Ms. Kathy Hahn.
Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean ocean deep its own appointed limits keep. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea. Lord, guard and guide the men who fly through the great spaces in the sky. Be with them always in the air, in darkening storms or sunlight fair. Oh, hear us when we lift our prayer for those in peril in the air. Eternal Father, grant, we pray, to all Marines, both night and day, the courage, honor, strength, and skill their land to serve, thy law fulfill. Be thou the shield forevermore from every peril to the core. Eternal Father, Lord of hosts, watch o'er the men who guard our coasts. Protect them from the raging seas and give them light and life and peace. Grant them from thy great throne above the shield and shelter of thy love.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's ceremony. And as a reminder, Chaplain Hicks and I encourage you to reach out to us if you are struggling with COVID-19 challenges or any other issues in this 2020 journey of faith. Thank you again for joining us today.